So what's remarkable is now, a year later, what we didn't know at the time was that a number of people within the FBI, at each stage of this wrongful action by the FBI Security Division, were objecting to it, and they were being retaliated against. Yeah, did they have hesitancy about the vaccine? Like, there's not a law that was broken, right? The idea of, these categories are just outrageous for them to even be asking.
Wild.
The FBI got someone to propose an amendment, they got it passed. Well, there's these general security concerns. And so the FBI's not even, the nepotism laws don't even apply to the FBI. Like, half of the prohibited personnel practices don't apply. And so they are excluded from that. And
Wild. I did not know that. Jeffrey Veltri is now the special agent in charge of the Miami field office. Trump was nearly assassinated on the golf course there in West Palm Beach, I believe it was. And this guy came out and was addressing the media, answering questions from the media. Well, there's another article from some Washington Times, that's right, that said that he had been found with a bunch of nasty Facebook posts and that he had to scrub his social media before he got that promotion. Of course, those posts were very anti-Trump. And so walk us through what's going on here. So this guy, Marcus Allen, is a client of yours, and you're testifying on September 25th, coming up very soon.
Yeah. So I think it's helpful to have some background here first before we turn to Veltri. But a year ago, I testified in front of weaponization alongside Marcus Allen and then another person we were representing, Steve Friend, another former FBI agent, and then Garrett O'Boyle, who we're also now representing. So all three of the people there we are representing or have represented at various times. That hearing, was the culmination of them having, they had all blown the whistle to Congress. They'd all been retaliated against. And the FBI had, essentially the eve of the hearing for Steve Friend. I mean, literally it was the day before the hearing. The FBI had sent a letter to Congress after stiff-arming them for months saying, we can't provide information about security clearance adjudications. We're not at liberty to disclose that. The process isn't complete. Well, then all that we knew at the time publicly was they finished the process. They sent a letter that again, smeared these guys. They sent that to Congress. The letter immediately got linked to the Washington Post. We don't know if that was from the Hill, if it was from the FBI. But so it's all out there that these guys, did these horrible things allegedly, right? So that hearing starts with the ranking member saying, you've invited 3 threats to our national security here into this hearing room. It's just ludicrous, right?
Wild.
I come in, I sit down next to Marcus. He sets his crucifix on the table there. He's such a religious individual, right? These guys are all just so by the book, straightforward guys. And so what's remarkable is now, a year later, what we didn't know at the time was that a number of people within the FBI, at each stage of this wrongful action by the FBI Security Division, were objecting to it, and they were being retaliated against. And so now we represent several of the people from within the FBI Security Division. So we've pulled back the curtain, and now we can see everything that was happening behind the scenes. And so this letter was an attempt to kind of document for the committee for next week so they can see. For Marcus, it's some real vindication. Again, before he was told he's a threat to national security, he was an intelligence analyst for the Marines. He received commendations. Even as an intel analyst, he was exposed to live enemy fire in 2 different instances when he was Lloyd, right? He loves America. And so for him, it was so hurtful to be told that he is a
disloyal.
Yeah, is a leader disloyal in question. That's right.
Guy who literally got shot at for this country was called disloyal with no evidence.
So to go back with the security clearance now being reinstated, so back after us fighting for all this time, his clearance was reinstated a few months ago. After that, again, dominoes started to fall. We learned, in fact, that the adjudicator who was recommending his reinstatement had been impressed with our submission on his behalf, right? Saying these guys are making the right arguments, and as I'm looking at the evidence, he should not have been retaliated against. We're representing her because she was retaliated against for saying that about Marcus. So
unreal. So
the letter goes into Marcus, it goes into Garrett, but again, that's some of the background. And so for Jeffrey Veltri to pop up, on America's televisions talking about this, there's an immense amount of information out there that we already had about him over the course of these last many months
because before he was the SAC down there in Florida, he was in the leadership of the security division at the FBI, which is the subdivision of the FBI that handles the security clearance investigations. And that was directly involved in overseeing the people who were objecting to what were the wrong things that were being done to Marcus and Garrett.
And so what was Marcus' original retaliation?
Again, as a staff operations specialist, that's like an intel analyst for the FBI. He's down in the Charlotte field office. He's assigned to their Joint Terrorism Task Force. And down there, his job is to help provide situational awareness of things that are going on. Well, they're doing a bunch of prosecutions of J6 defendants, right?
Yeah.
And so along the way, he's sending information about those. Say, hey, there's this information out there that some people are arguing that X, Y, and Z. Well, if you recall, in 2021, one of the big kind of mysteries is the wrong word, but not less than a month after January 6th, Director Chris Wray goes to the Senate, to his Judiciary Committee, right? It was Jason and I's former committee. And there he is asked by Senator Amy Klobuchar, she says, don't you wish you had some informants there on January 6th? Wouldn't that just have been so helpful? And he says, yeah, operational information is good wherever we get it. He really sidesteps the question. And so then in the summer of 2021, Reuters comes out with this article saying, is it possible that they had some people there? And then in September of 2021, there's this blockbuster Sunday front page New York Times article that says the FBI had at least one, if possibly 2 informants. Now we know that there were something like 30, right? But at the time, that was big news. There were 2 informants there. So Marcus put in an email back to his coworkers on the JTTF and his supervisors saying, given that Director Wray, I mean, he wasn't as explicit about this. I'll say in a minute what he said specifically. The background was he's aware of Director Wray's testimony. Now it's coming out that there were informants there on J6. So his email says there's a good possibility that the DC elements of our organization are not being fully forthcoming about the events.
This is Marcus who sends this.
Marcus, he sends that. And that is the one email, that is the key thing that everything got him into all the trouble, all throughout everything his supervisors. And, you know, again, I get that, like, they don't love people questioning the director of the FBI. That's fine, right? And I get that, you know, January 6th is a very charged topic for a lot of people, and it certainly was in the FBI, as we outlined in our letter. But whistleblower law that's been around long before January 6th says you're allowed to make disclosures, and someone lying to Congress is the sort of thing, or making disclosures of potential wrongdoing, that you can be protected and share it. And so all of the information, all of the subsequent action that happened to Marcus as the agency was like, well, but don't forget, he did this. It all hinged on this one thing that was a protected disclosure, as you would call it under the law. And so they can't take action against him for that.
So he got red flagged for a J6 opinion, basically. And then did the same thing happen to him, right? He's also getting bumped out of meetings and...
It was worse. He got suspended without pay.
Yeah, that's right. And I would just point out there, again, not that it matters on the spectrum of these things. Again, it wasn't even necessarily an opinion about J6. It was an opinion about the testimony that Chris Wray gave in front of Congress, which again has significant ramifications, repercussions, right?
Right.
So,
yeah, thanks for the clarity on that. That's a small nuance, right? So that's very important, right? He's saying that there is a problem with what our leadership is reporting through the official means of communications to Congress in an official body, right? It's not like they're having a conversation over beers.
And it's important to know that he knew that not only because of the New York Times article, when everybody else, you know, would have known that and could have put 2 and 2 together themselves, but he knew it because he was supporting cases there in the Charlotte field office where they did personally, that they were working on cases where they had people he was working with were running informants that were there. And he knew that. So he would have known when he first saw Wray give the testimony, right, that it wasn't completely candid and complete.
Yeah. And so then he gets penalized. Eventually you guys, you know, connect, and now you're learning a lot more about the same pattern of bias, right? He expresses this one opinion. Suddenly he gets blacklisted or red flagged. But
and the background behind that, right? And this is what we try to lay out in our letter, is how this came about. And so Veltri is just one kind of cog in the FBI machine.
Yes.
Deputy Director Paul Abbate starts as the deputy in February of 21, so the month after January 6th. That very same month, and this is an affidavit we provided to the Inspector General a year ago from a different whistleblower, but that very same month, Abbate comes in and says, on a call with all of the FBI management, every field officer's special agent in charge, for most of them, they'd have their ASACs in there, assistant special agent in charge, there's headquarters folks in there. He says on there, I'm hearing that a lot of people are questioning the FBI's response to this, and I'm here to tell you, if you don't like how we handled January 6th or our investigations, our response to that, you shouldn't be working the FBI.
Yeah.
If you want to have, if people have questions, have them come to me. And so, as our affidavits there says from that whistleblower, says he's never seen a direct threat like that any other time out of hundreds of director video conferences.
Yeah.
Feeling and personal, communicating clearly there'd be consequences for knowing the question's direction. So that whole year, kind of the chain of FBI leadership, and there's a lot of turnover in these high-level FBI positions, but the people that come into place, you just end up with this real alignment that all of them share this view that if you don't toe this very specific line on how the FBI should respond to January 6th, including you can't question, right, whether the FBI should have been more aggressive in response to riots across the United States in the summer of 2020, right? That's one of the things they say, no, can't question how we responded to this. And so that's what puts people on the flag for this kind of security clearance action.
So Paul Abbate's number 2 at the FBI. I mean, deputy director at the FBI, much more so even than the director. You have the guy who runs the place, who can overrule normal personnel procedures and just put someone in a job if he wants them there, or can take them out of a job if he wants to, right? You have that person sending the signal to all the people below him, dissent on this issue will not be tolerated.
Right. And aggressively. I mean, you guys wrote it in here. You say that, you can just imagine this. Okay. He told a group of all senior FBI officials, all the second in command, right? The whole group, everybody get together. Anyone who questioned the FBI's response or our decisions regarding it did not belong in the FBI and should find a different job, right? It says Director Abbate also told the assembled leadership that if they had an employee who did not agree with the FBI's response to J6, they could have that employee call him directly and he would set them straight. great. It's like, whoa, man. I'm in favor of, leaders of companies, and you got to set the tone and set the mood and all that stuff. But
they set a tone, all right.
They set a tone, and part of their job is to kind of investigate what was happening on January 6th. And we don't have an official number on how many undercover informants were there, but we covered the Proud Boy trial at length here. And in there, the defense team, they said, it never got admitted, but they said that they identified like 50 people, I think was the actual term they used, 50. And a big portion of those were HSI people and other people who were not a part of the FBI, but, other agencies. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable to have questions about that. And of course, the FBI doesn't want you to even talk about it, not even come up with an alternative explanation for any of this. So
as you scroll down in the letter, you see kind of as things move forward, again, that year, you end up with this series of folks who have these similar views on things. And Abbate is one who, not Abbate, Jeff Veltri is one who in particular, kind of right from the jump, has this view that like, if you don't view things the way he does, again, you're not worthy to work in the FBI, right there in that paragraph right there. Veltri's and Perkins' perspectives were that if an FBI employee fit a certain profile as a political conservative, right above there, they were viewed as a security concern and unworthy to work at the FBI, which again is essentially a statement of what Abbate had said, right? Veltri also said openly, well, you might have First Amendment rights, but you don't have a right to security clearance. And so again, they're sending the message all throughout. As you say, they're setting the tone. So your rank and file people, just a few weeks ago, Director Wray testified before the Judiciary Committee that I'll be in front of. And he was asked about the Trump questionnaire that's come up, right? Something that back in June, I went on Tucker Carlson. We talked about this. And part of what he said in there, it's further down. But
I did remember that. The Trump questionnaire.
But he was asked there about that questionnaire. And he basically said, well, it was a low-level employee who's gone from the agency already, and it wasn't a standard form or anything else like that. Yeah, right there below that paragraph next. Testified that they were asked by an outside contractor. But the point that I wanted to make for that thing higher up above is that this security division that conducts these investigations, although you've got, again, you've got Chris Wray, you've got Paul Abbate, you've got Jennifer Lee Moore, you've got then another assistant director, which changed. For a lot of it was a guy named Doug Beidler, and you've got Jeff Veltri. As you get down to like the line level folks, they are mostly just contractors, or they're people who left the FBI and were coming back. They call it a reemployed annuitant, right? You have your pension, come back to do this other kind of functionary job.
So I just found that section here, the questionnaire, right? This Trump questionnaire. So it's almost like there's like this form that they're sending out or something, or just asking people questions. But they were even asking about medical decisions and whether they got jabs, like whether they took the jab, and the evidence clearly. So if you took the jab, you were on one list. If you didn't, you're on another list or something?
Yeah, let me explain the background of that for you. So what happened was we were representing another client who's not been public at all. And one of the things that we do when a client has their security clearance revoked is, then only after it's revoked, you then get to ask the FBI, hey, give us the file, right? Give us the security file. We want to be able to see all the evidence, much like a criminal defendant, right? In a case, like show us what you got, right? And so after they've revoked it, you get to see what they got. So we got the file, and we found what people call the Trump questionnaire is really just interview outline that was prepared by the investigators. And so it was used in questioning witnesses who knew our client. Again, not Marcus Allen, this is a different client, but they went to the coworkers and they asked the coworkers, here's the outline, here's the questions I'm going to ask. And then it had written underneath it, what the answers were. And it had these really inappropriate questions that were right there when we were reviewing the documents.
And it started with, before they even jumped in, one of the first questions was, have you ever socialized with this individual? I mean, they're right at the outset, they're saying, first of all, you're required to answer all these questions correctly. Your own security clearance could be in jeoprdy if you answer any of them incorrect. Then they ask if they've ever socialized with them. So they have completely set the tone here, right? For like, all right, I got to tell everything about this person. And that's
basically they're pressuring coworkers to rat on their coworkers, right?
Like, right. And then to isolate, then don't ever talk to that person again, because you're going to get asked about it if it comes up.
You don't tell me the truth. If you don't answer these questions.
Yeah. Did they have hesitancy about the vaccine? Like, there's not a law that was broken, right? The idea of, these categories are just outrageous for them to even be asking about.
Wild.
So then the question is obviously like, well, how widespread is this, right? So we send it to the inspector. Tristan went on Tucker and talked about it, got a lot of attention. And then, Ray gets asked about it and he says, well, he sort of passes it off as like a one-off. Well, we know from our other whistleblower clients now, it absolutely wasn't a one-off. They may not have written it down and pre-typed it every time like that. But what we've learned is, and what the letter that you've been showing people goes through in great detail is, there was a tone set by the leadership in the security division that these are the issues they cared about. These are the questions they were asking in the meetings when they're going over and they're overruling their subordinates when their subordinates are saying, there's not really a security risk here. And it's like, they're asking questions like, well, is he vaxxed? Is he a Trump guy, right? So they might not have written that down or given them a direct instruction to say, you will ask everyone these questions, but the people who were doing the investigations knew how to please their bosses, right? That's why those people wrote down those questions, is because they knew that if they could find something on those two issues in particular, that was something that their bosses were looking for.
Well, and the flip side of that, right? And I don't know if you want to control F for Kelly cart in the document, right? This is one of the things that when we first heard this from Whistleblower was like, are you kidding me? But it turns out that it was actually two interviewers who were conducting these interviews involving our clients. They were there for the interview of our client, again, not Marcus Allen, the other one, and doing so. They were the ones that used this outline. But what we were told is they were so fearful of being fired by the leadership of the security division, they talked about something called the Kelly cart all the time, which was a reference to someone else in their unit who pushed back against a woman named Dina Perkins. She and Jeffrey Veltri were thick as thieves and were the ones that were always making these comments about, well, I don't know, these religious views they have, or, I don't know if they didn't get the vaccine or whatever, right? So they pushed it back against her. And so she's walked out of the building. She's terminated. Meanwhile, someone shows up. They'd all been here in this unit working together. Some unknown person just comes and starts putting into a cart all of her personal belongings. They were like, what's happening? What happened to Kelly over here? Well, the Kelly cart came for her. And so after that, they talked about this all the time. They were all afraid of that. So when Ray says, this was a one-off from just a contractor and they're gone. And by the way, it's not like they're gone because the FBI took action against them. They're just gone because their contract was up. In fact, those employees were reportedly terrified of crossing. So it wasn't just they were just seeking to please. They were afraid that they were going to be harmed, that there would be consequences if they didn't go after these kinds of things, following the tone set by their bosses.
And this letter just has a pattern of this, right? So you're testifying about this to Congress. What's the purpose of this? Are they trying to identify this pattern? What are they going to do with this? What are they hoping to achieve by showing this clear pattern of basically anti-Trump, anti-conservative behavior? I mean, even here, you were talking about this Catholic stuff, right? Saying that here, the implication is that Veltri believed that Mr. Allen's Christian beliefs as a devout Catholic were a reason to revoke his access to classified information.
So when they interviewed Marcus Allen and they said, why'd you send that email, right? That horrid email, which was just, again, the protected disclosure. And he said, well, I felt like I had a moral obligation to do so. The Holy Spirit compelled me to do so. Again, he's a very religious individual. And so then they're like laughing about that. Veltri told people that he thought Marcus Allen was crazy because he didn't suggest a specifically secular or moral or ethical reason. It was that he felt that there was like a religious component that he needed to follow his conscience. So again, these were the sort of things that are outrageous in here. But I think there's two things that we really hope. Well, actually, we'll say there's three things for Congress. First of all, I will say that as a former congressional investigator, it can be very difficult. For one, you can't get specific personnel actions, right? Congress can't reinstate a whistleblower. I wished so badly that I could when I worked on the Hill, right? We worked on whistleblower policy. We would amend the law to try and strengthen these protections. But ultimately, it's these other agencies that I moved into after Congress, the Office of Special Counsel and the Merit Systems Protection Board. They're the only ones that have that kind of personnel authority. So Congress doesn't have the authority to do that. They could cut funding or something. There's a lot of things they could do. And I know a lot of people have, make fun of strongly worded letters, right? But there is an element that they can't reinstate an employee. And so I think that's important to know for this. But what they can do is publicize the circumstances. And one of the things this letter walks through is the fact that as these guys are being retaliated against, Congress was asking about that. Now, it turns out that what did, in fact, was cause these individuals to be somewhat retaliated against more, maybe, and certainly for the FBI to try harder to cover its tracks. I don't think that means that Congress shouldn't have been inquiring, right? So they were doing their job of oversight, and it just turns out the FBI was continually fighting. So laying the record of that out, I think, helps to build support for what we think ought to be statutory changes, right? Jason and I have worked on these laws for many years. When Senator Grassley was about to become the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I wrote a long memo to Jason, who was my manager at the time, saying why this was the time to try and get FBI protections strengthened. It turned out that all we were able to get in the next Congress was some very limited protections, and actually have that law framed here on my wall from 2016.
Amazing.
But there's still a lot of changes that need to happen. And so that's a big part of what we want to be able to explain in this hearing. We've been talking about those for a long time, and everyone says, yeah, statutory, it gets boring quickly, right? But now reading through something like this, I think really helps to illustrate, okay, you've got to have these kinds of protections. The FBI is the only federal law enforcement agency that doesn't have the same whistleblower protections as all the other ones. Secret Service, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshals, they've all got the same whistleblower protections except for the FBI.
I did not know that. What distinguishes the two, or what's the difference? They're just
one doesn't put their pants on one leg at a time, apparently. I mean, there's no rational reason for it, but in 1978, when they passed these laws, the FBI had immense clout still. It was a few years after J. Edgar Hoover's passing, and the FBI at the last minute, it wasn't originally that way in the original bill, but on the floor of the House, the FBI got someone to propose an amendment, they got it passing. Well, there's these general security concerns, and so the FBI is not even, the nepotism laws don't even apply to the FBI. Like half of the prohibited personnel practices don't apply, and so they are excluded from that. And
wild. I did not know that. We make make fun of them for the FISA courts and how they get access to all of our private information and stuff like that without, like, in other words, there's exceptions for the FBI. The rules don't apply to them like they apply to everybody else. So you're saying that they have a little bit more ability to tamper down some of the whistleblowers from arising than maybe other agencies do.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
On paper, there's
a whole separate section of the law that just applies to the FBI, right? Because they were exempted from the part that applies to everybody else. And so it's just written differently. And it's weak in many, many ways. It's weak in terms of they can't make disclosures to the same places. They have to only go to certain people.
And let me
it's weak in terms of the protections, the procedural protections as to whether they can ever get someone out to ever look at it and, correct a miscarriage of justice.
I was just going to add on the specific who they can make disclosures to. One of the things that's come up, right, and is some whistleblowers that we're representing from the Air Marshal's service about Tulsi Gabbard, right? It's a perfect example of where that whistleblowers for most federal law enforcement agencies can go to the media, and the Whistleblower Protection Act doesn't limit who your protected disclosures can be to. If they meet the protected criteria, the media can be protected recipients. And a colleague of ours,
except the FBI.
Yes, except the FBI. They cannot. That's one of the exceptions where they cannot go to the media, even if there's something blatantly, clearly wrong or illegal or unconstitutional that the FBI is doing.
What an interesting environment. And I'm curious if you can share any insight or any thoughts on the status of whistleblowers in America. Is this something that, we're seeing an increase of? Are we seeing more courage? Are people freaked out about this? I mean, you guys are busy. You're doing a lot of work. Obviously, you've got a lot of different things, rods in the fire. But the country's changing pretty dramatically, right? The DOJ is not the same DOJ it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We're seeing, Trump's being prosecuted now in multiple jurisdictions. Like, all the old precedent has now been shattered in many ways. So I'm kind of curious what the state of whistleblowers is. Are more people seeing things and speaking out? Are the people that you're talked to, are they facing, new pressures? What's the game field kind of looking like from your perspective?
Well, from my point of view, I think the people they're sort of waiting to see how a lot of these controversies come out.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've specifically heard that, like in the case of our IRS whistleblowers, right? Secrecy is kind of a one-way ratchet, right? And it just sort of eats up everything around it. And, even though the law specifically says, yeah, you can go to Congress, you can go to the tax committees, they see what has happened and what what happens to people and when there's negative consequences. So, there's all this litigation going on. I think we know specifically we've been told, like, there are people who are thinking of blowing the whistle on things, but they're not going to do it until they see how this litigation comes out. Right. So I think everybody's, a lot of people who might want to are kind of in a holding pattern. Right. Yeah. And so let's see how this works. And then on the FBI side, it's not just making the FBI under the same whistleblower protections as everybody else. It needs to also just look at the security clearance process, because this is a loophole that you can drive a truck through to retaliate against the whistleblower, and nobody's going to stop you. Everybody's going to defer to, it must be a security risk, right? And we saw how that played out last year. And now we know, after a year more of investigation and more whistleblowers, that was bunk. These guys weren't legitimate security concerns. They were just whistleblowers who, got on the wrong side of people who could retaliate against them.